obviously, unless you've been living under a rock, UCLA and USC head to the Big 10 in the latest part of drama as it goes to conference realignment. And so, Richie, I don't know what this means directly for FSU, but I do know that FSU indirectly means that more change is coming, right? The big conferences, the Power Five is about to be the Power Two, and they are in a battle or in a war right now to acquire talent, right? We talk about college football being a talent acquisition business, which it certainly is from a coaching standpoint. It certainly is from a player standpoint. It certainly is from an administrative standpoint. You obviously want good athletic directors. Miami picked up Clemson's. We have Alford now. So I think that the conferences see it the same way. And Notre Dame's a massive, massive domino that needs to fall. Sounds like the Big Ten's kind of just waiting on what Notre Dame has to say and what they're going to do. But, Florida State is going to go somewhere. Like, I'll just put that out there. Like, Florida State is not going to get left behind. Florida State will end up somewhere. I would lean SEC. I don't think that the SEC – what I think, and I think Miami and Florida State end up in the SEC. And the biggest reason is because I don't think the SEC wants the Big Ten to have a foothold here in Florida, or at least a relevant foothold, right? Like, I could see the Big Ten picking up like a USF or UCF or something like that, just to try and get into Florida somehow. But I don't think it'll be irrelevant. I don't think the SEC will want a brand like Florida State or Miami to go to the Big Ten and kind of give them that foothold. I think that they'll want that. When you look at the big brands remaining and still out there, right? It's Clemson, it's Notre Dame, it's Florida State, it's Miami, North Carolina, Oregon, Oklahoma State, Baylor. I mean, at that point, like, you're really dropping
Duke,
down.
If you want to go basketball, but
I just don't think basketball. Yeah, I don't think basketball matters. NC State, you could throw them in there. Boston College for regionality. TCU, Stanford, Utah. I mean, you're talking like 15 teams, right? 15, 20 teams that matter. And I think all 15 or 20 of those teams are going to end up somewhere, and I think they'll all be out of where they're at right now. And so Arizona State to try and get into that area, Arizona. Florida State's in the top half of that and not even close. Like, they're probably, like, when you look at your five biggest brands that are just like kind of in limbo right now, it's Notre Dame, it's Clemson, Florida State, it's Miami, and then someone else. I don't know who that fifth one is, and I don't think it even matters. I think there's a distinct Oregon. It's probably Oregon. And then I think it's a drop off from there, right? Like, those are your kind of top. Those schools will end up somewhere. I put Oregon and Notre Dame in the Big Ten, and I think it's going to be the three from the ACC here going to the SEC. So I don't know. I've heard some rumblings and I know that, people report on Twitter, or you see, sources are telling me this. Like, I don't know if anything's really happening right now. I've heard some rumblings that we could hear something in the next several months before 2023. I don't know exactly what that means for a timeline, but the what's been pointed out to me is that Texas and Oklahoma are joining in the 2025 season. So I think that if we were to go to the SEC and something was to happen, it would probably be that year. Not writing that in stone, not saying that other things can't happen or things can't change, but that's kind of been what's been kind of voiced my way. So, Richie, thoughts on conference realignment? What do you think it means for Florida State indirectly? Where you are? Are you worried? Are you not worried? I'm not nervous at all, by the way, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not really nervous right now because, like you mentioned, if the ACC does blow up, which it may not entirely, but maybe it ends up like the Big East, right, where they're kind of basketball-only conference. It's interesting because I don't think the triangle schools are going to stick together, right? The Wake Forest, UNC, Duke, NC State, they're all going to stay together as long as they can. But then you do have the kind of the redheaded stepchilds, and you think of Florida State as the top one. Clemson, is kind of accepted into the, good old boys network of the ACC, so to speak. That's who the ACC, if they could have their pick, Clemson would be, the team that running out in front, leading the way. But then you look at Miami, and while they haven't had great recent history, it's still a major national brand, right? And I think this is where the ACC kind of dropped the ball in the initial realignment. They were struggling so much, like, we need markets. So let's get Syracuse and Boston College. What have either of them brought to the conference at all? No one in Boston College or in the Boston area of Massachusetts cares about college football. It is NFL, NFL, NFL up there. I doubt they gained much market share by going into Boston. Same with Syracuse. And I love the school, family ties to the school. But what did they really bring to the conference? Their basketball program hasn't been what we thought we were getting when they had, Carmelo Anthony back in 2002. So I think the ACC made some miscalculations, and I think it's a lesson for the Big Ten. Like you mentioned, they could go get a UCF, USF, but what's that really do? Okay, yeah, you're in the Florida market, but guess what? If Florida State, or Miami's on, every local sports bar is going to have those games on. No one's going to care about watching USF versus Nebraska, right? It's just not moving the needle. So I think you hit the nail on the head where Florida doesn't want Florida State in the SEC. They love that advantage in recruiting and the monetary payouts that they get at the end of the year. But it's certainly beats the Big Ten coming and picking up Florida State and Miami, because now you're really in trouble, because the Big Ten, they got us all the way down to the southeast and Florida to Miami, all the way to the West Coast with USC and UCLA and the whole Midwest, and they're in the Northeast. The SEC's beyond regional at that point. I know they're not going to stretch from Texas over to Florida, but I think it'd be a wise move for the SEC to just bite the bullet and say, listen, give me Clemson, Florida State, and Miami just to keep them out of the Big Ten. And I think that's the decision that has to be made right now. I don't think these decisions discussions between UCLA, USC, and the Big Ten came out of nowhere. They've probably been going on for a long time. But typically when we see the realignment, the announcements are kind of out of nowhere. But it's pretty obvious that those discussions have been going, in the back channel for a very long time. I fully expect that this is not going to make Florida State, Clemson, Miami start looking for new options. I think our ADs have already been looking those options, exploring these options. Obviously, they can't go public in saying that, but we know Mike Lawford is very close with several ADs, including our friends down south. So I think it's going to be interesting. And like you mentioned, I'd be surprised if the ACC is around in the way we see it, 3 years from now. I think it'd be a home run for the Big Ten to say, hey, Notre Dame, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, let's make this thing happen and see what the SEC does. But I really have no idea. If I had to predict, I do think the SEC is more likely, but I'm definitely not going to rule out the Big Ten, because I think that they probably have their eyes on Florida, and we'll see what happens.
If the Big Ten made the move to bring on those 5 schools that we mentioned, right? I think the 5 biggest brands still left out there: Florida State, Clemson, Notre Dame, Oregon, and Miami, right? If the Big Ten got those 5 brands, and I'm not talking like what's like those schools right now, I'm talking those schools like when they kind of get back, right? Like we know Florida State's been down. We know Miami's not been what they should have been for the last several years. Would that make the Big Ten more formidable than the SEC? Like, because then imagine the SEC takes like your next 5 schools, right? Like your Oklahoma State, your maybe UCF to have another school in Florida, your Baylor, your Arizona and Utah, right? Or something like that, or Stanford and Utah, right? So Stanford's a lock for the Big Ten with their academics, but let's just say that like Big Ten gets the next best 5 schools out there, which are again Oregon, Florida State, Miami, Clemson, and Notre Dame, and then the rest of it goes through the SEC. Does that make the Big Ten more formidable? Is the SEC still like the premier conference? What are your thoughts there?
It's tough. I'd probably still.
That's a dumb hypothetical, but
I'd probably still lean SEC, and partially what they mastered, right, when the initial realignment happened. Because remember, up until Florida won in 2006, the SEC was kind of an afterthought in the national conversation. But Florida kicked off a string of 7 straight national titles, and they made that branding and they capitalized on it. So the SEC, it was a perfect situation of timing and branding and saying, hey, we're going to make everyone know we are the premier conference. Even if we're not, we are going to tell everybody we are. They had us believing that schools like, Ole Miss and Mississippi State would be, national powers. And we saw them both in the top 3 of the college football playoff rankings for a week in 2014, which we knew clearly was behind the branding, because if you watch the teams, they weren't up there. I don't know, but I do think the Big Ten is definitely the conference that can compete. If anyone's going to take down the SEC in today's college football landscape, it's going to be the Big Ten, and it's going to be doing it by adding schools like Notre Dame and Miami and Florida State and Clemson. And what I think stands out, and Carol commented on it. The Big Ten, they do take their academics very seriously. And I think it's a big deal that Florida State has worked themselves into a top 20 academic institution in the country, because that's a much easier sell to the Big Ten if they decide they wanted a school like Florida State. 20 years ago, the Big Ten never would have even considered Florida State, just because,
Right.
they were around the top 50 public schools and they take those rankings seriously. Clemson's a very good public school. Obviously, Notre Dame, the Big Ten, they've been wanting to add them in football for the longest time. I'm excited. I do think we're looking in the next few years, some sort of super conference. I think the next 2-3 years between realignment and NIL, it's going to turn a lot of college football fans off. But I do think when it all settles, it's still going to be the same product we all love, and we'll still be watching these games every single Saturday.
Yeah, I think I'd lean SEC as well. I think you're right on that. Mostly for perception, right? Like, we just have this perception that the SEC is so much better than everyone else. Adding brands like Oklahoma and Texas are huge, but Texas at this point. So here's why I think perception-wise it'd be SEC. I don't know that it would really be much different. If you took Alabama out of it, it'd probably just be split even, right? Like, I know the SEC built that 7-year run that was really, really great. And, they had multiple teams win it. Alabama, Auburn, LSU, and Florida all won, most of them multiple times within that 7-year run before yours truly, Florida State, ended it. But that's not the SEC today, right? Alabama and Georgia are elite, and everyone else is a mid-level program at best. Who's the next best team in the SEC? A&M. So they went 8-4 last year, right? Like, they went 4-4 in the conference. So, like, they're the next best team in the SEC, and they can't even get above 500 in their own conference. So the SEC is good, but it is incredibly top heavy. And if you were to take Alabama out of that, we would view the SEC very, very differently. And so, yeah, but again, for that perception, I'd probably rather be in the SEC because that's a lot, perception is reality, right? There's a reason the SEC does better numbers. Also, I do think football in the South is different. And so, yeah, I'd rather be in the SEC than the Big Ten. I do think in 10 years, they're not even going to be called that anymore because, when the SEC picks up Oregon, I don't know how you call that the Southeastern Conference anymore. When the Big Ten picks up, Stanford and UCLA, I don't know how that's a Midwest thing anymore. So, yeah, they'll probably, they don't even have 10 teams anymore, right? They've got like 16 teams. So, yeah, I would prefer to be in the conference with Florida and Alabama and Georgia because those are the teams I want to see us play. I don't want to be driving. I don't want to be going up to Michigan and all that stuff. So,